next investigation. Now, I was just looking at GB News video. This one here, the actual video is garbage, you know, but the comment section's full of some interesting comments. And reading about this one here, Indians start a slave trade. Basically, this is exactly what I think that the Indians done the slave trade, and you know, the white man, obviously the Britons and that, have got the blame for it, right? But this stuff is correct, what this person's saying here. But if you go out to India today, right, you've got this terrible caste system thing, which is probably one of the worst societies on the planet, you know, in terms of the way peoples are treated. We've got a real underclass of poor, right? The peoples that, you know, they spit on them in the street, you know, because they're so poor and all that, right? Which is like this terrible snob system, right? And that's what they're basically bringing across here. Right? They're trying to recreate it. When Indians come across here, they're recreating their own society across here. Right? You see, right, the Indian caste system. And again, I was bringing this British idea in, but yeah. You know, this was the upper class people. You know, whenever I see that word Varnas or something, I think of Reg Varney from one of the buses. You know, like it's a Jewish caste. It's like a Jewish idea, but it's in India. And then they bring it over here. They're importing it bit by bit over here. So basically, social communities are what they're doing is building up this same caste system in whole Britain. Nagaland, you know, Serpent Land. Of course, this becomes a symbol of the Freemasonry. You know what they're doing. The Freemasonry is basically reconstructing an Indian-style caste system in Britain. You know, similar to the Freemasonic gems. This thing's got 4 or 5 faces or whatever. And this symbolises the sort of lies, you know, when it's basically pitting off everyone against each other. Treachery and, you know, lying to everyone, to confuse everyone and all that. And of course, what they're really doing is building up this type of thing. Again, you know, you've got this caste system. If you notice what's going on, right? They're basically, Indians are taking this middle level, right? They're coming in around in all the businesses that would put them in this level. Right? They're employing their foreign African migrants in this level, right? Obviously there isn't like farm workers, but it's just like supermarket security staff or something like that, right? Now look at this one here, the Dalits, the untouchables, which is obviously the outcasts. Now the newest one, if you notice, all the white ones in Britain are becoming this Dalits untouchables caste, where you've got you know, homeless, derelicts, and you know, drug addicts and alcoholics and all that lying about in the streets, right? Which is basically this. It's a direct result of them building up this type of societal idea within these societies. Of course, you know, in recent years the propaganda has put forth the Indian type of concept as if the Indians were like peace people, spiritual people, and all this. But if you come back a bit further into the history, you come back to sort of like if you remember when you was a kid and you used to get comics, and the World War II comics. Before, prior to that, the comics was about, and the stories was like boys' adventure stories, was all about adventures in India. Right? For example, that Rudyard Kipling thing, The Man Who Would Be King and all that. The earlier comics, right, what people used to read was war stories and not adventure stories in adventures in India. Now, So it was like a, you know, like a boys who earn an adventure thing, and the Indians was always portrayed as thieves, you know, as thieves and robbers, and you know, that was the story, you know. So it was like the Indians were the bad guy type of thing, you know, in these comic books. And then that became the Indian all of a sudden become the propaganda turned over, and the Indian became this lovely person and all that, right? But they were known as, like, you know, like the thieves and robbers and all that, right? You know, like this thuggy culture is definitely directly linked to Freemasonry, right? Because obviously you got your TH, right? GG 77 and your EE your 33, which is directly to do with Freemasonry, thuggy cult. And obviously that Indiana Jones movie put it a few years ago, right? But this is basically Freemasonry, right? So it's basically known what they do, you know, they're building up another Indian society system, right? These are basically like behind the background, you know, in the background of it. Of course you had that rapper, you know, Thug Life or something. What was it, Tupac, you know. And he looked Ethiopian, you know, Tupac, you know, looked Ethiopian or something. So definitely the Eritrea, Ethiopia and India type of thing is, yeah, the day with Freemasonry and all that. But it's quite funny how that, you know, the image of an Indian changed over years from this, right, to where, you know, obviously and Peter Sellers done one as well, where he was the Indian in that movie, at the party, right? And the thing changed, and Ronnie Barker and all that, you know. So it changed from a sinister image into like a sort of comical image, you know, to give the Indian a propaganda, right? Coming into these different lands and that, right? Then this will become the Hindu goddess, you know, Kali, like Charlie, you know, Charlie, obviously king. Colin is the witch. Again, this one's got to be same as Baphomet as well, you know, Muhammad. It's just like the Muhammad one is obviously a man type of thing, and the Kali one's a woman. But as we know, it's duality. They've got to be the same god and goddess thing. Again, if you're talking about slave trade, all the evidence points to the Indians being the slave traders, right? Taking the African ones, turning them into slaves, and then basically the Jew religion serves this, you know, serves their gods and goddesses and all that. The Jew religion sort of conquered Europe on behalf of them, Indians. Yeah, of course the Indian Jews in the Temple of Doom. Of course, these are produced they're done by Steven Spielberg, right? And George Lucas, I think. You know, George Lucas is obviously done the Star Wars, and it's basically Jewish. This was produced in 1984, right? So obviously again, 1984. Again, like it's set in the 1930s thing, you know, like when the idea of the Indian, you know, it was like I say, the idea of the Indian was the thief, you know, not the spiritual person, and all that. Right? You see, it's like a Masonic metaphor. Obviously, the Kaaba stone and the Muslim. As you see, the team behind it, you know, Spielberg and George Lucas. George Lucas reads philanthropist again. Now, when you use the word philanthropist, you should be very wary of them. Of course, a star, that becomes Jews anyway, right? Star Jews. And, of course, it's well known that the hidden story behind it is all about the Jews and Exoduses and all that stuff, right? It's well known, obviously, with the Star Wars movie. And there's a famous scene in that Star Wars where they're in the cantina scene, which becomes a metaphor for multiculturalism, you know, when there are all the different aliens in the cantinas. And basically before that one, right, George Lukács, right? George Bernard Lukács, the Hungarian Marxist philosopher. So basically, the second George Lucas had to be named after this one. And his Marxist theory and all that. Soul and form. This is like the scene in the Star Wars when in the cantina, as they call it, and again like a canton, it's basically like a Jewish idea. Apparently it's in Mos Eisley, so Moses, again Moses, a Muslim type of thing, right? And, all these different species is sort of in there together, which is, and people obviously see it's multiculturalism metaphor. So obviously there's a direct link between Marxism and multiculturalism. And this was one that found as a Western Marxism. Reification. Contributed to Marxist theory. Karl Marx theory of class consciousness. So again, you know, this they're wanting to rebuild this new society based on an Indian style thing. So this Marxism, the Western Marxism, is, you know, all part of it. Interestingly, the possession of the power of the state is also a movement for the destruction of the oppressing classes. And of course, to portray the white man as the oppressor, you know, which is quite strange, man.